I'm Jeremy Till, and this is Amplify. Kyle Maynard's our next guest. What a motivation, inspiration, all the things included. Kyle is a quadriplegic amputee. He has climbed Kilimanjaro and done a lot of other feats that will just blow your mind. He's featured on Nike commercial. He travels the nation and the world speaking to Fortune 500 companies, schools, children. Anybody that hears his message will be touched and inspired to go on far beyond your own limits and pursuing, your goals, your dreams, the possibilities. Visiting with Kyle, you know that he is a wise soul, seeking wisdom, reads a lot of books, has a lot of insights, is connected to a lot of thought leaders in the marketplace, and it's just an honor to have him on. I got to meet Kyle in 2009 at a CrossFit affiliate gathering, and ever since meeting him, I just followed him in his journey of kicking ass and taking names. It was such a pleasure to have him on the podcast, and here you guys go. Right on, yeah. So a lot has changed for you. That's cool. I know I catch blips of things that you're up to, and your speaking engagements and the process that you've been on, just impacting the world and motivating people. And so what are you doing in San Diego?
Having fun, man. It's actually like the biggest challenge is in being in San Diego is that it's hard to focus on anything but having fun sometimes, you know, because it's like just such a beautiful place. People are usually pretty happy. And, I go in, I've got like a co-working office space, and I go in there on a Friday, and basically like it's a ghost town, and they're like, what the heck are you doing here? It's a Friday. I'm like, people working Fridays in other places, I promise. Yeah.
So tell me what you're up to professionally. I mean, what does your day look like, and what are you up to?
So, still have my affiliate, and had that for 8 years now. We just had our 8th anniversary with that, and it's actually more profitable, successful now, helping more people than at any point in time, which I was actually living in Atlanta. So the gyms, I live in San Diego, gyms in Atlanta, and so that's been going good, but basically on autopilot now. So my focus is really, it's been the speaking, but my idea is within the next year is to transition that into creating a community, primarily starting in San Diego. Mm-hmm. And, want to empower, very similar to what you're doing. I want to empower, other leaders. I want to empower, artists, entrepreneurs, athletes, people with kind of their own personal brand and influence, and maybe just everyday people that want to go and take on something bigger and kind of find their purpose. So it's calling it the mountain movement, but that's like the main focus for this next year is to like help people find their mountain and climb it. Absolutely. So are you looking like how are you building the community, or like what's your stepping stones to getting that thing started? It's really it's something that I've felt like is this need for a while. Like I'm a psychology, self-development junkie. I could try to consume a lot of different things that are available out there, but a lot of the stuff is very theoretical. So you sit in a conference room and you hear somebody speak, and then like either you take a nugget and apply it to your life or you don't. And so for this, I want to make it like a much more kind of active, hands-on process. So that's why it's, primarily within people in Southern California at first, but like, having, a 2-month long process, or a 3-month long process, you can kind of work on things like over time. Mm-hmm. And really it's about having other people take on a project that has a double bottom line, so it's both a project that has like a level of profitability, sustainability, but it's also something that has like more meaning and purpose. Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the core tenets of like what you would be teaching or doing with the community?
A lot of it is, it's stuff that you've learned from, your time gripping a barbell, it's how to manage yourself. It's how to manage your state, how to manage, just when things don't go great, and I think in and also setting that plan. I think one of the biggest things is really being okay with having people tell you the truth about things, right? Like sometimes like devil's advocacy and all of that like is more important than than having somebody tell you that like every idea that you come up with is a great one, right? Like you need people that do that, but also support you in figuring it out. So a lot of it's like self-work and, sort of like working on them and figuring out like, hey, if you said that you wanted to go and do something, why hasn't it happened yet? And what's kept you stuck, whatever that is. I've gone deep down the rabbit hole of like, it's not something I've really talked about publicly before, but, I went and backwards, like deconstructed what like, Tony Robbins, a lot of other people like that had done. I went and got certified and, as a master practitioner in neuro-linguistic programming and went, basically, had this 10-year search of like, how do I get the tools to like reach into somebody and grab their greatness and pull it out?
Mm-hmm. So have you been through Tony Robbins' his full mastery university and all that stuff?
No, it was really kind of like that actually ended when I just kind of went and I found his original teachers and went and studied under them. Mm-hmm. So, I kind of wanted to go straight to the source.
Gotcha. Okay. And so with your speaking engagements, this is just guests. People invite you to come out and speak to the companies. And that's something you've been doing for the last 3 years, like primarily?
Yeah, man, I've been actually now, so I'm 30, gave my first speech like basically like a month before I graduated high school. Right. And, given close to 1,000 speeches now, like 5 continents and like close to, several 100,000 people. So it's been pretty remarkable. Which I think is, kind of helped me try to learn the skills necessary for this next iteration of whatever this next thing looks like. But at the same time, I think my general life philosophy is very much aligned with, sort of the specialized and not specialized mentality. Mm-hmm. And I get that, like, I've spent this 10 years specializing and becoming the best keynote speaker that I can be. But yet there's just tip of the iceberg of all these other things that I want to go and do and take on. So from your life, Kyle, like, you speak to people, and I'm interested about your internal conversation with yourself. And I want to get like a short on your story so the audience knows, where you come from. And then I want to talk about your internal conversation because, about how you perceive yourself. Because what I understand from the outside is that your perception of yourself is that you're no different than anyone else. Right. But people are looking at the visual aspect and how it is what you do and all that. But let's tell your story real quick, and then I want to kind of dissect like what your conversation with yourself is. So the story really starts with my family, and my mom and dad. I was the first of 4 kids, and they had no idea that when my mom was pregnant with me, that I would be born basically with my arms ending at the elbows and legs at the knees. And so, for people watching the video, you can kind of see like my arms in kind of symmetrically at the elbows, my legs very similarly right at the knees, and so. That was a big surprise to him because the ultrasound technology, we were younger, right? Like, and it was like a lot different when she was pregnant with me. They just had no idea. And they made it a very important decision to not treat me any different, and that was easier said than done, but they did an awesome job with it. I grew up playing sports. I was a football player, wrestler, later competed in weightlifting, and ended up, fighting in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Championships, fought in MMA, and now most recently climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and this year climbed the high peak in South America, Mount Aconcagua. Oops, and I got my alarm going off. Sorry. So, yeah, I mean, this is a perfect example, but like use, pretty normal cell phone, like, there's not really that many adaptations or like differences in my life today. And I think a lot of it had to do with, it was really the inner dialogue of my family, I believe, that, helped them, like just realize that I could have a normal life and not to listen to all the, it's just kind of the general lies and BS that like a lot of the doctors fed them at first that would never be possible.
Mm-hmm. So what's your parents' background? Where do they come from?
They are, so my mom, she went to school to be a teacher and, came from an amazing family. I've got amazing grandparents and then in Indiana, my parents met in Washington, D.C. My dad was military. So he actually was like a total, academically, he was super smart, but just kind of a screw up academically growing up, just kind of slacked off and failed out of college. But he was wrestling and playing football and ended up going to the military. Military gave him some discipline, which massively straightened him out. And then he went back to school to get his engineering degree from Purdue. So.
Got it. So when you your motivation and charge to take to do physical activities and to work out, what was that inner dialogue for you to say, I'm going to do physical activities? Was that, where does that come from?
A lot of it was just, where you mentioned, I think you really hit the key point that I didn't see myself as different from other kids, and I kind of joke and say it was like a Jedi mind trick that my mom pulled on me and my mom and dad collectively, but it really was. It was almost like, like you're not disabled. Like, oh, okay. Like these aren't the droids you're looking for. Like that was kind of how it was like, and, so of course, like I knew that I was like, different, but it wasn't something that they fixated on. It wasn't something that they obsessed over. And so then I didn't have to either. There's just, so many facets to it, but really they just didn't see me or treat me as differently. And I see kids now, with physical disabilities or not, right, that their parents kind of go and coddle them or pamper them and all of that. And a big part of what I experienced was my mom and dad just forcing me to experience failure and not for, it was like failure to the point where then I would figure it out, not failure for failure's sake, but failure to eventually get to the other side and have work through something. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to play. And that was the simple thing. I brought a flyer home from school and told my mom that I wanted to play football. And that's where it all started.
Mm. That's awesome. So the last few years, climbing, was that a passion of yours that had kicked on? I know I saw your Nike commercial, which was pretty awesome.
Thanks, man.
Where did the that aspect of climbing come into play?
I think that most of my ideas are frankly due to I've got a pretty extreme case of ADD, and it used to be something that I was I never got diagnosed until very recently, but I think that I joke about it, but in truth, I think that that's kind of where it is. It's just, I have varied interests and, don't really stick with one thing for too long. If, in terms of business stuff or whatever, long enough to get it going, and then I want to go and try to figure out something else, and solve a different problem. And the mountain climbing was, I'd kind of solve the problems of wrestling and jiu-jitsu and all of that. And I wanted to solve the problem of mountain climbing. And it was the 2010, CrossFit sectional. Was back before the CrossFit Open, so it was, CrossFit sectional with the first workout was, I signed up 24 hours before the event. I had a lot of other buddies that were in Atlanta that were doing it. And, the first workout was we had to do a 1,000-meter row and then a sprint up Stone Mountain. And, so Stone Mountain's a little 900-foot peak, and tore up a lot of skin on the ends of my arms doing it. I had leather welding sleeves I tried to use as shoes. And, I'd been to the top of Stone Mountain because there's a tram to get to the top. But that was my first time under my own steam getting to the top. And I looked around, I'm like, this is freaking beautiful. And I'd been there a bunch before, but the thing was I'd never taken the trail, never earned it. And, so basically from there, I was sitting in an ice bath that night and told my friend, one of the girls that went to my affiliate, I was I want to climb, I'm sitting in an ice tub telling her I wanted to climb Kilimanjaro. And she said, "You're freaking crazy. You just tore all the skin off your arms doing Stone Mountain. How are you going to do that?" I told her, "I don't know." And I really think that like, I don't know, or like 3 of the most powerful words I've ever learned or spoken in my life, because, knowing is actually such a big limitation. Like when we have to know something to go and get started, we have to know something before we go and like, we have to have the perfect plan for this or that or whatever. And sometimes it's really just to get started and fail. And that's what we did. Lot of failure before Kilimanjaro. In fact, I didn't get my final gear system, until about 2 weeks before we left. And I had just previously failed on like a tiny 2,000 foot peak. And now we're about to go and do one that's one of the highest peaks in the world.
So you have a team that was climbing with you, or what does that look like? Support from that?
We had a big team, yeah. So Kilimanjaro was a huge team, and we had ESPN that was filming a story with, some of my buddies were filming it. We had, and like, we had 9 Americans, including me, a lot of stuff, and then, we made it. Everybody made it to the top, and then. We had like 30 African support staff too, and guides and porters. And in Aconcagua, the one that we just did this February, which we're on the mountain for 17 days. Nobody's ever really heard of it, but it's about 23,000 feet. Kilimanjaro is about 19, a little over 19. And anyway, that one we had a team of 6, and it was gnarly, but I really realized why the SEAL teams, operate with such small groups. I mean, it was brutal, pushing me to my absolute limits, but we made it there too, and got to stand on top of the high peak in South America. So this year we're, 4 years after Kilimanjaro, we were, just could almost see the curvature of the earth sitting on top of Aconcagua.
So earlier in the interview, you're talking about self-development and leadership, and what are some of the sources that you get information, or who are some of your key people you read and follow?
It varies a lot. I try to, I think it's, I try to classify things in terms of, some like very old sources, whether it was, the Upanishads, Stoic philosophy, the Bible, like very old, much older sources. And, then more, some more recent ones of people that have lived lives that I respect and that I want to live like. I read a lot of biographies. So like Teddy Roosevelt's biography, Ralph Waldo Emerson's biography, people like that I really wanted to understand what it was that made them tick. And, then now too, a lot of, people that have done it more recently, in terms of, even, some people that, go to resources. There's a Facebook group that I've just gotten to be obsessed with called Marketers and Founders, and I mean, it's a bunch of like kids that are, in their early 20s, though, most of them 20, 25, some of them are a little bit older, but like, these kids are killing it, and like, learning how to go and market and like reach people and build audiences and all kinds of stuff. I have a breadth of things, but also too, studying psychology. NLP was a big part of it. Other self-development programs, it's a kind of a never ending introspection. My parents sometimes, and girlfriends have commented that maybe if I have like one sick addiction, it's probably like my book hoarding, because I just have, that's like the one thing I collect. I'll get rid of everything else in my life, but I'm not getting rid of my books. I just have massive bookshelves, and like right now, I mean, actually you can see, these are, some of the books that are just like hanging out here today, right? So, I figure like our mind is a muscle, just like our, just like our bodies, right? So we got to be able to program for that too. We got to be able to give that varied stimulus. We got to be able to, you know, I don't know, just constantly work it and stretch the comfort zone there. I think a lot of times, you know, we think that like once we've gotten education that like that we're good. And I'm like, nah, my education started the moment I dropped out of school.
Mm-hmm. So how many books a month do you read?
Well, you know, it's a tricky thing because I also too, I don't
books.
I don't recommend that people complete the books either. Maybe that's just my own thing, but like most nonfiction books I think are not worth completing. I complete most fiction books that I read if I enjoy the story, you know? So, Dune is one of my favorite books of all time. I don't know if you've ever read it, but the Dune series is phenomenal. And like, there's so much like personal development inside of there. It's not even funny. It's amazing. You know, but other stories too. Like I don't buy into like all of the philosophy behind it, but like, you know, another favorite book that I go and read frequently is, one right here, but it's, so Atlas Shrugged, you know, like I've gone back and read that several times. Like I'm not buying into all of the philosophy behind it, but like certain characters in there's certain characteristics and traits in fiction stories too that I can learn leadership lessons from my own life. And, you know, but most of the nonfiction books that I have in that stack are like ones that I won't finish and I'll get an amazing nugget from or two. And if I get an amazing nugget that's going to go and impact my business to the tune of several thousand or tens of thousands of dollars or more, then why wouldn't I do that? You know, but why would I go and waste my time on like, you know, reading like all of it? You know, I don't know. I mean, I do go through a lot of it, but I don't obsess over like finishing everything I start.
Gotcha.
Sometimes I think you got to learn how to quit before, you know, like sometimes there are things that you should quit much sooner, I think.
So from all the things you've been doing, like what is a hot button or hot topic for you, or hot like that you're really into right at this moment in the area of like self-development, what you're practicing, what you're focused on?
You know, I right now I think the main focus for myself is kind of in like finding a way to simultaneously decrease my stress and also, you know, or triple the amount that I'm taking on. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I need to go and take that on personally. A lot of it, building teams and asking for help and support, you know, and empowering other people. So I've been very fascinated by, you know, Napoleon Hill for a long time. And one of my good friends recently, came across out of print, like out of everything, very piece of thing, but 1,000-page manuscript of Napoleon Hill's, like basically 10-year study of Henry Ford. And so Napoleon Hill wrote Think and Grow Rich, if people don't know of him, but it's sort of like a lot of it was like the father of like many would say the father of like sort of personal development. And but like, at least in terms of their modern day, you know, I mean, there's thousands of years old, you know, this stuff. But, you know, I'm noticing like, how is it that Henry Ford was able to take on what he did, you know, and he didn't do it alone. You know, he absolutely had to build teams. And part of, you know, my biggest challenge growing up, like we talked about with the disability, was my parents kind of raising me to have that fierce independence. Well, that there's a dark side to that too. You know, the dark side is that then I go and try to take on everything on my own, you know, and I don't empower other people. You know, and Henry Ford, he said 90% of all management is hiring, right? So if you get the right person, like if you put in the extra time to hire the right person in the right place, they're going to be able to go and do things, you know, just phenomenally better than you could yourself. And, as an entrepreneur, as a creator, as, kind of that visionary, like if you're busy doing the tactile things, sort of, or like the tactical, day-to-day things, you're not using your time effectively. You've got Nicole, who I emailed with to get on this podcast. I know that you've got a team of, coaches and trainers, and, you've got a team that you're building yourself. I know for me, I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm looking at other friends have done that and thinking like that's the only way to make it to that, sort of next level of what I want to reach to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think from early on, I learned that teams were vital for success in my early 20s. And one of my key focuses was to develop teams and to leverage the relationships to really create an environment that everyone could have the success and lifestyle that they, dreamt of having. And it seems that teams were the best way to pursue that. And so, it's always, I've always seen myself as a headhunter. I'm always headhunting talent. So I love it. So I have that mindset that I'm always looking for the next talent. As an entrepreneur, if we're always looking for the next talent, because, people move on, things change, everything can shift. So you got to have that next person. When you find yourself at the end of the music and there's no one there to transition to, you can be in a lot of pain.
Totally.
And I felt that way in certain aspects of my career, that I didn't have the next person lined up, and I was the one that felt that pain.
Fill the gap.
So it's very important to always. And I know when I'm at the peak of my game, I'm always headhunting talent. A few aspects for me with team building is actually probably one of my strongest traits. Have you read or taken the Strength Finders 2.0?
I have, yeah. It's been a little bit, but I've done a lot of the psychological assessments, and I actually get most of the people that I work with to go and do the same too. Yeah, it's so important to learn about the people around you.
Yeah. So with Strength Finders 2.0, and then just studying personalities and really learning how to bring the right personalities together that properly complement one another, and so they can feed off of one another. I was given a pretty horrible analogy about in my last Friday staff meeting before the end of the year about, if there's, a man in the woods trying to create a fire, he's going to have to rub two sticks together to create that fire, to create that energy. And, when you find yourself with nothing to rub together and you're by yourself, I mean, you're going to have a hard time starting a fire. And so, but it's just like, that's the importance of burning together and coming around the fire and coming around the people and doing it together. That's the big thing. My last podcast I put out was about mantras, and I created a statement for the new year. And I was going to ask you, have you heard of Wim Hof, who's doing the breathing cycling? Have you practiced any of that?
I have, yeah, and I have very much. It's kind of funny. Wim is on a very short list of people that I really wanted to train with, and he, because that's also too, I'm constantly kind of headhunting in the same way as you are for teachers as well, right? I want to, where's that, and also I think get so much value from being with people and in person, and being able to feel their energy. And I've had some amazing teachers and mentors. So lucky with that, but well, not lucky. I mean, a lot of it was creating that luck, but still, just the people in my life were just phenomenal. But yeah, Wim, so funny. I showed my buddy, one of my best friends is on the SEAL teams, and actually that's how I kind of through him reconnected with Ryan Williams. I know that's kind of in a roundabout way how this came about. You just interviewed Ryan for your podcast, and but with Wim, I showed my buddy a video on Wim, and a couple days later he met him in LA, and talked to him about me, and he was like, "Oh, well, Kyle climbing Kilimanjaro naked in record time," and it was pretty cool. And then a month after that, I met him in the Salt Lake airport, and it's just so crazy sometimes, those omens that just show up like out of nowhere, and but Wim is a super cool guy, and his son that helps run his business is a super cool guy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that from my standpoint, the breathing and the cold water application has been the biggest game changer this past year. Has really set me up for knowing 2016, just from understanding the nervous system and understanding the ability to tap into that autonomic nervous system and how we can impact and, really with our alkalinity and just overall energy and vitality has been a game changer for sure for me. But the reason why
That's awesome.
I was asking you that was on a specific reason, but I can't think of it right now. It'll loop back to me. But man,
we're talking about too with kind of like the goal being, there's so many different ways to attack this and to look at this, but talked about the threshold of like, how do I go and triple what I'm doing and reduce my stress simultaneously? If I'm going to go and have that as a real goal, what does that actually look like? And I think that, absolutely Wim with the breathing, with the cold exposure, with, having, just a little bit more discipline with diet and things like that, and recovery, that is a huge contributor. It's like the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So that's, that's very much on my radar to really try to, to take on this coming year.
So do you practice the breath cycles?
I started a breath practice through Mark Devine, who's another really good friend of mine and a mentor. I met Mark maybe 2011, and it was from him that I started, box breathing and some other techniques. So, for box breathing, that's, that I don't know how familiar your audience would be with that, but it's another breathing technique that it's a little bit different than Wim's. I've used Wim's super effectively, actually. It's so random, but I was, shooting they have these sort of like a, beer pong with buckets and wiffle balls at this place called Moonshine Flats in San Diego. And I remember I was just draining shots after I was doing Wim's because it's just so hyper focused. But anyway, the box breathing is basically you can start with 3 seconds, you can start with 5 seconds, go up to 10 seconds. If you're super elite, maybe 15, 20 seconds, but basically, taking, if you were to take, a 3 to 5 second breath in, hold for 3 to 5 seconds and then blow out for 3 to 5 seconds. And, you sort of, you're fully exhaling, right? And then holding out for the same amount of time. So you pick your amount of time. If you were going 10 seconds, it'd be a 10-second breath in, and you feel like your lungs are almost about to explode. Hold at the top and hold there for 10 seconds. Release fully for 10 seconds. You feel like, now you literally just had, every bit of air sucked out of your lungs, and then, you hold there. And it's an amazing practice. I actually use that a lot on Aconcagua to help deal with the altitude and other effects that we're just having on my heart rate and all of that.
Awesome. So I know that you have a set time with us today. So we had some specific questions that I was going to run through and ask you. And the first one I was going to ask you is, what has been your greatest challenge?
I think the greatest challenge was really at 10 years old, becoming more self-aware of the disability and all of those things, really wondering what the rest of my life was going to look like. Just that self-doubt that was coming into play, the fear over what my future was going to be, and feeling the separation from other kids, not feeling normal. By far the most challenging period of my life. Some people face those things, in different ways at different times, but I truly believe that every single person on this planet has a disability. Disabilities, you just can't see them all the time. it's, you can look at me and see that I was born different. I can't necessarily look at you and see what yours is, right? But it's absolutely there, and it's there for all of us. And the greatest challenge was beginning to see that as the gift that it is. Now there's absolutely no way that I would go back and change anything. Even as hard as some of those days were, it's absolutely like I am who I am. Like, you couldn't offer me $1 billion check to change that and to go back and live with arms and legs. Like, there's no way. I mean, it's the greatest gift I've ever been given. But at the time, it felt like, I would pray every night that I would just like wake up and have arms and legs. And then I would wake up and I would be disappointed that it didn't happen. And if I'd lived my whole life that way, wishing for something like that instead of realizing the gift that it was, then it would have been a very different life.
So what was the shift for you that made, like, was it a time thing that evolved, or was there something that had you shift in your mindset?
I think it was a series of events. I mean, I don't think it was one thing in particular, but if I had to pick one moment in time, it was making my first tackle in football, and this basically, the short story was that this coach, he, kind of wanted to take it easier on me and told my coach, like, I was playing nose guard, so defensive line, right? And this guy told my coach, he said, like, I was 6th grade, 11 years old. I had never played before. It was like our first opening game. And he said, when you put Kyle in the game, I'll just run the ball to the outsides. I won't run the ball in the middle at him. And I understand completely, like, why I did that, like why I would have that perspective. But my coach basically, he brought me over and told that coach to tell me the same story he just told me. And after that, he said, I dare you to test him. And the running back on the other team, this kid was a monster. 0 chance. This kid was 11 years old. I mean, he was like over 6 feet, 6'2", beard, biceps, like twice the height of anybody else on the team. And he comes crashing through my hole in that first play. And the way I'd tackle people was I'd take my helmet and try to smash it into their legs and grab their legs at the same time. And that's how I'd take people down. And like, remember grabbing this kid's legs and holding on for dear life. And, we brought him down. And that, like, that moment in time, I know for a fact, like, it kind of loosened the grip on some of those fears. So I think a lot of times people expect that, like, that fear is just going to go away. At some point we'll be ready because we're not going to be afraid. And it's like, no. I mean, there are things you can do to loosen the grip of fear, but I think fear is like one of the greatest tools. You always want a little bit of it there. It's something that's led me and guided me. I've spent a significant portion of my life in terrifying fear, and like, you feel the fear and you do it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question for you. What is some of the greatest advice you've ever gotten?
To one of my mentors I spoke with this morning, actually. It was amazing. He's just a phenomenal human being. Ron Shapiro. He was one of the most successful baseball agents of all time. So he managed Cal Ripken through Cal's whole career, and Kirby Puckett, Joe Mauer, a ton of amazing, like, Hall of Fame players, and negotiated some of the biggest contracts in baseball. And as with baseball contracts too, I mean, those are like some of the biggest contracts in sports. And but Ron is a relentless devil's advocate. And so I used to like really get frustrated when people would like kind of, if I had oh, this is a great idea, this is the next big thing, blah, blah, blah. And then like, somebody would rip it apart. And I've realized that like the people that love me the most are the people that are most willing to like rip into my ideas in a constructive way too, right? Like, it wasn't like he's like, oh, you're a failure, blah, 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 you're never going to do this. It was like really like, okay, if you have a business idea, make sure you find, that there is a need in a market, and, relentlessly interview for that, like figure out where that need exists. Don't just assume things, right? Ron is a relentless devil's advocate, and collectively through all my mentors that I have in my life, I see that they live in another one. Ted Leonsis is a guy who's lived a, kind of came from nothing, or at least very little means, and now he became like the vice chairman of AOL, like when it was amazing, cool to be the vice chairman of AOL. But he always talks about like live a double bottom line in life, don't forget where you came from and how to help someone else. So do things that, that's the whole idea with the mountain movement is, helping people do things that are, profitable in terms of their experience, but also helping people find, purpose and contribution through what they're doing. Because if you don't have that, I think what's the point? It's return with the elixir, give it away to someone else.
Mm-hmm. That's good. All right. Your most favorite book, podcast, and movie?
I got to go with, I'd say book, Dune, for sure. Movie, Braveheart, absolutely easy one. And podcasts, I'd pick a podcast episode, and it would be, I just got to do a 3-hour interview with Tim Ferriss, which was amazing, but that's not the point. I really had a lot of respect for him beforehand, but Tim did an interview with Jocko Willink on the Jocko podcast. And the Tim Ferriss episode with Jocko is like super powerful. And it made me actually have 10x the respect that I had for Tim going into it.
That's good. And then what are 3 points of advice that you would give to somebody that would be, immediately applicable?
The most immediate, I think, is still this from Jocko. Jocko, it's one of his lines is be tougher. Like, oh, it's cold outside, be tougher. You're hungry. Oh, you don't want to get up and work out, be tougher. Number 2, like, it's a gray area between things that you should, quit versus, never give up on, right? But like there are some things that you absolutely should quit. There might be people that are listening to this that are in, a terrible abusive relationship. They should quit that. If they're in a job that they can't stand, they should quit that. It's not quitting. It's just like, look, it actually takes more courage to do that, to quit, something sometimes. And, which is kind of counterintuitive to what I've always talked about. But, and the other one too, is the third would be, I used to say anything is possible. And I get the spirit of that, right? I get the messaging behind that. And even to the, from like a biblical perspective, like all things are possible through Christ. Right. And however, at the same time, it's like, I also want to reframe that like, I think it's like, it's such a cheap way to go and explain things that like, anything is possible. Okay. Or go overhead squat a semi truck. Right. Like, well, like at the same time, like, no, look at like, know your limits right now. Like know that there are very real limits right now, but never ever stop trying to break them and have a very real assessment. Like if you tell the truth to yourself about where those limits exist and about where you're making excuses about things, then you can go and do something about it. But if you just go and, kind of whimsically pass something off as like, anything is possible, then it's like, you don't have to tell the truth to yourself. So tell the truth to yourself and then freaking do something about it.
That's awesome, man. Well, all right, last thing that I have for you is I know you talked about your community that you're building, but anything else that you want to amplify and let our listeners know about?
I think I just go back to this. The most important thing is like, there are people that are listening to this that can impact lives in ways that you and I cannot. And they are sitting there and they might hear that and they might think, oh, that guy's full of crap. Cause like, whatever, like, I can't do this, I can't do that. And it's like, if they're saying that to themselves in any way, then like they're the one that I'm talking to. But like, get over your stuff, get over your excuses, and like realize that like you can go and make a difference in other people's lives. And there's no greater gift, right? Like there's no greater thing. Like you don't need a freaking Lamborghini, you don't need a helicopter. Like go and do something and find an organization to go and make a difference with. The K2 Adventure Foundation, the No Barriers, 2 organizations that I work with, Travis Manning Foundation, the Honor Foundation in San Diego. There's some, the USO, there's some ones that I've gotten to work very closely with, and some amazing organizations with amazing people. But like locally in your community, go and find somebody and freaking help them. I think that's it.
That's awesome, man. Well, all right, brother. Well, I know that you need to get. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, man. It's really good to reconnect with you.
No doubt, man.
Love what you're putting out in the world.
No doubt. I think we'll reconnect in the future, man. I'd love to do work with you, and whatever you're doing with your community and ours as well. Some time in the future, hopefully we connect.
Absolutely.
And do something, because it's whatever is going on with me right now coming in 2017. I feel very primed to have just a breakthrough year. But with your interview as really another capstone, I don't even know what it is about the interview that is having such a profound effect on me. But whatever it is you're up to, Kyle, keep doing it, man. And we're going to see you out there in the world. All right, brother?
That means a lot. Thanks, brother. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Yes, sir.
All right. Talk soon. All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Amplify Podcast. You can find more at theamplifypodcast.com. Our social links to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Join us in conversation. Let us know what you're thinking and how we can best service you guys. We will see you again really soon.